How do you handle everything in life? Well, the first thing you have to know is that whatever happens to you, whatever's happened on this earth, has been allowed by God. He has allowed everything. Now, I majored in philosophy in seminary. And in my doctoral seminar, one of my greatest seminars was the mystery of evil and suffering. And there are 8 traditional answers to that we can't go into right now. But if God's a good God, how on earth did evil happen? Because He's so good, He gives man freedom to love Him back the same way He loves us. But the only way we're going to learn to love that way is have the ability not to love. Now that's a great question there, but we can't take time for it. But God is sovereign. One of the things I use is, God gives us freedom enough to be responsible, but He keeps enough of His sovereignty to be in control. Now, that is an antinomy, we say in philosophy, 2 things that seem to contradict and yet don't. It's close to a paradox. A paradox is easy. Look before you leap, and he that hesitates is lost. You can figure that out. But you can't figure out the freedom of man and the sovereignty of God without faith to understand the mind of God and what He's doing. Everything He's doing is the best that could be done, giving man the power to make his own choices. So that's kind of how it goes. But everything that happens to you and to me, God has allowed in mercy. Now that's the first thing we need to remember. There's a difference in mercy and grace. Mercy is God keeping the bad that ought to happen to us from happening. Grace is giving us the good we don't deserve. Great distinction in those 2 words, mercy and grace. They're the big difference. So the first thing we have to realize is that God has allowed everything in mercy. Now there's a great verse of that, and that's why I'm going to be so quick today. If I gave the verses for each one of these points, we'd be here about an hour. So I'm just going to give you the 5 points without all the verses. But this verse is important. Romans chapter 11, verse 32. Here's what Paul says. For God has consigned all men and women to the jailhouse or the prison house of disobedience so that He can have mercy on them all. You see, if you're wondering about what's wrong with you, read Paul in Romans 6 and Romans 7, and it'll tell you. Somehow Adam and Eve, our Adamic parents, really messed up. They thought they could be human without God. That's what you and I are in trouble for. Isn't that right? You don't need God. You don't need Jesus. You don't need the Bible. You don't need His truth to be what you need to be. You can make your own mind up, and if it didn't work out, you can rub His rabbit foot and have Him come in on it. It doesn't work that way. God allows everything so He can show us how merciful He is, and we'll give Him glory. That's what the whole thing is about. Now, if you're a Christian, a believer, want to take up your cross, follow Jesus, that's the first thing we have to believe. He has allowed everything in mercy. Now, what we need to do, we need to accept everything that happens in faith. And that doesn't mean we need to be stupid about it, or, we don't have evidence. We do have evidence. The greatest thing on earth is to have faith in truth. And but it'll pay off every time. If you have faith in the lie, that's where you get in trouble. You see, we each have to have faith. Either we're going to trust God or we're going to play God. Which do you think is going to work out best? So that's the second point. We accept it in faith. Now, if you're a Christian, I had a funeral here last year. I've had about 400 funerals. And this is of a dear lady I love, really faithful in the church. And as I was preparing the sermon for her funeral, the Lord gave me a new definition of faith and said, where have I been? How have I missed that? I sure didn't learn it in seminary. Here's what faith is. Faith is adjusting your life to the promises of God. That means you have to believe that God has the power. You have to know what the promises are, and you have to yield to what the Lord says. See? So that's our second point. The first thing we do, know God has allowed everything in mercy. We accept it in faith. Okay, Lord, this has happened to me. Now what should I do? I have polio, or I have cancer, or my mate was killed, or my child has an incurable disease. Good night. You've allowed this in this earth. And I know philosophically this is real deep. How on earth could God in heaven allow a madman like Hitler or Stalin to murder millions of people? Well, that's another question. You got to go a little deep. Don't be surface on that. But anyway, whatever God has allowed in your life, we accept it by faith. Father, I'm going to believe that this is for my redemption and my good. And it will be if, see, God has allowed it in mercy, we accept it in faith, and then we also adjust to it in praise.